Hello today from Incredible Crime Stories. In this sad and quite shocking story, we will learn about a tragic criminal case that happened in India in 2009. We share the tale of Samira, a beautiful young woman who was forced to marry into a wealthy but brutal family, driven to the brink by violence and abuse from her cruel father-in-law. She was sexually abused, beaten, and had to find a way to escape in desperation. However, her escape ended in a gruesome murder. We will share the details of this case to understand better what actually happened. The story begins with a forced marriage and ends in a tearful tragedy. Samira was born and raised in the village of Rajur, Gujarat, India. Born into a poor farming family, she is the only daughter in her family. Samira endured a difficult life since childhood, lacking both material things and development opportunities. Her family, being quite poor, simply did not have the conditions to send their children to study much, and so Samira only finished secondary school and had to drop out of school to help her parents with farm work. Life in a small village with hard farm work trained her to be patient and tolerant, but also deprived her of opportunities that many other girls in the city had. Despite her difficult life, Samira always stood out for her beautiful appearance. Her healthy dark skin, big round eyes, and thick black hair. Her beauty made her the center of attention in the village. By her teenage years, Samira had attracted the attention of many young men in the area. Oftentimes, young men in the village tried to get to know her and confess their love to her, but Samira, who was reserved and modest, did not pay much attention to such things. She always appeared reserved, avoiding attracting too much attention. However, there was one young boy who touched Samira's heart. Amir, a poor boy from the same village. Amir, then 25, was a kind and hardworking young man, but his family also faced many economic difficulties. He and Samira often met while working in the fields, or when she helped her mother sell goods at the village market. Their love developed quietly without much fuss, but full of sincerity, as they understood and shared with each other the difficulties in life, the dreams that were left unfulfilled because of poverty. Every time they met, Amir's eyes were always full of love and promise of a bright future. But Samira and Amir's love could not last long, the harsh realities of life. While they both confessed their profound love, Samira's family always lived in poverty, relying on the erratic harvests to make a living. Samira's parents, although loving their daughter, were forced by the pressure of poverty to think about a more stable future in the society where they lived. Marriage was not only a result of love, but also a tool to improve the status and economic conditions of the family. Therefore, they began to see Samira marrying into a rich family as the only way to escape poverty. Samira, despite knowing her family situation, still cherished hopes for her love with Amir, but those happy days did not last long. When she was just 23 years old, Samira's family decided to marry her off to a wealthy family in the town of Abad. The decision was not only driven by the desire to provide a better life for their daughter, but also by financial pressures and the influence of village connections. The groom's family were wealthy and powerful and approached Samira's father with a proposal of marriage. The man Samira's father was promised was Rakesh. He was 20 years old and the only son of the family. Although the family had a lot of assets, Rakesh was not what Samira's family expected. He was not smart and had a low IQ and often displayed foolish behavior. However, the amount of money that the groom's family promised to pay for this marriage was too much for Samira's family to refuse. They were not only thinking about their daughter's life, but also about ensuring a more stable future for the family. The dowry, the wealth, and the promises from the groom's family overshadowed any feelings of love that Samira had for Amir. They did not think that their daughter would have a happy life, but in their eyes, the happiness of the family was more important. Samira cried a lot when she learned about her parents' decision. She felt betrayed as it turned into a trading tool in the hands of adults. Her sincere love for Amir was considered non-existent in the face of the cruel reality. Though Amir loved her deeply, he knew he could not fight against power and money. Their love affair, though not officially ended, was ended by irreversible decisions from Samira's family. The night before her wedding, Samira couldn't sleep as the feeling of insecurity and the pain of leaving her beloved gnawed at her mind. The words of her parents, the looks of her neighbors and relatives, all weighed heavily on her shoulders, but nothing could make her forget the image of Amir. She knew that her life was about to take a different turn of path. she did not want to take. Tomorrow morning, she would become the wife of a man she did not love and could not even have a normal conversation with. Faced with that prospect, Samira felt she had to meet Amir one last time to break up this relationship. She quietly walked out of the house in the dark, passing through the familiar village roads, where she and Amir had shared so many memories. The two of them had made an appointment to meet in the fields, where they often looked at the stars together and talked about the future. When Samira reached the place, Amir was standing there in the quiet darkness. His eyes were filled with pain, but he said nothing as they both stood in silence for a long time, not needing to say anything because their hearts knew each other's feelings. This meeting was not only a goodbye, but also a farewell to the unfinished dreams they once dreamed. Finally, Samira walked towards Amir, and in the silence of the field they embraced. And it was no longer the sweet embrace of young lovers, but one of pain of inevitable loss. Emotions overwhelmed them, and they both knew that this was the last moment they would have together. Samira, with a broken heart, decided to give everything to the man she loved that night. In the middle of the deserted field, they had a passionate night, merging both physically and mentally. That was how Samira chose to keep something of her love before she was forced into a loveless marriage. All the desires and emotions that had been suppressed for so long were released that night. After a night of passion, they lay side by side looking up at the starry night sky, but their hearts were filled with pain. They both knew that when dawn came, everything would be over. Samira would have to go back to her new home, where she would belong to another man. Amar, though in pain, knew that he could not keep her. Before leaving, Samira looked deeply into Amir's eyes one last time. She engraved these moments in her mind, because she knew this would be the last time she could be with the person she truly loved. The wedding day was hastily arranged, and Samira could do nothing but obey her parents' wishes. Helpless and in pain on the day, she left the village to go to her husband's house in the town of Abad. Amir came to see her off. They just looked at each other in silence. Neither of them said anything, but both of their eyes were filled with indescribable pain. Samira left the village in silent tears, leaving behind the first and only love of her life at her in-laws' home. Samira quickly learns the cruel truth about her marriage. Her husband, Rakesh, is actually mentally disadvantaged, incapable of understanding or meeting the needs of a wife. Their relationship existed in name, only as a barter for the two families to fulfill their purposes. However, the reality was much more brutal than Samira had imagined. She gradually realizes that the main reason she was married into this family was not to be Rakesh's wife, but to serve the lustful needs of her father-in-law Viraj. Viraj, 48, was a cruel and violent man. Initially, he would often approach Samira in a sweet manner, trying to seduce her into serving him. He used shameless words and ambiguous gestures, trying to possess her in subtle ways. However, Samira skillfully avoided him several times, hoping that he would give up. She was afraid, but tried to keep her distance, believing that if she did not react, Viraj would not dare to go further, but her escape could not last forever. Viraj was a violent and aggressive man, accustomed to using his power to force what he wanted. When he realized that his coaxing was not working, he decided to take her by force. One night, when everyone in the house had gone to sleep, Viraj suddenly entered her room. No longer just coaxing her, he brutally forced himself on her. Samira tried to resist, but could not escape Viraj's grip, and he humiliated her in her pain and helplessness. After that night, Samira's life at her in-laws' house turned into hell. Viraj, realizing that she was no longer capable of resisting, became increasingly cruel. Viraj was an abusive and violent man, not only towards his daughter-in-law, but also towards his wife, Reena. During the years she lived with Viraj, she had to endure oppression and violence from him, which left her fearful and hopeless. Reena was completely subdued under her husband's iron fist, and therefore, even though she knew about the heinous acts that Viraj had committed against Samira, she did not dare to speak up or intervene. Her silence only made Viraj more tyrannical. Initially, Viraj was sneaky in his attempts to take possession of Samira. He tried to carry out his depraved acts in the dark, when no one was around. Samira, despite being humiliated and heartbroken, tried to keep quiet, as she knew that no one would stand by her. However, things quickly changed when Viraj felt no need to hide it anymore. He gradually became complacent and took his power over Samira as a given. In the family, Viraj started sexually abusing Samira, even when there were many people around the house. He no longer cared about the presence of the family or the servants. He committed these violent acts right in the living room, where everyone in the house could easily see. Her mother-in-law Reena, family members, and even servants were present, and no one dared to object or speak up. They were all terrified of Viraj and endured the atrocities in silence. Even though these atrocities were happening right before their eyes, Viraj's cruelty did not stop at abusing Samira. It was evident in the fact that he did it all so openly and naturally. He felt no guilt or shame for his actions. His act of humiliating Samira in front of his family and servants almost became a way of demonstrating his power in the house, letting everyone know that he could do anything without fear of opposition. Samira lived in humiliation and despair, knowing that no one will protect her. Viraj's actions become more frequent and public, causing her to lose all hope of escaping this hellish life. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law and everyone in the family could only stand by in fear, as if they were captives of Viraj's tyrannical power. There was a smoldering rumor spreading in the family that the reason why Rakesh, Viraj's only son, became dull was not inborn, but due to a painful incident in the past. According to rumors, when Rakesh was a child, Viraj, with his violent and abusive temper, once got so angry that he hit his son hard on the head. That hit is said to have caused severe neurological damage, causing Rakesh to go from a normal child to a retarded child with a low IQ like he is now. Most people believe that if it weren't for that fateful blow, Rakesh might have grown up to be a normal person. Instead, he became a person who was incapable of taking care of himself, completely dependent on his family. Unable to bear Viraj's brutality and the miserable life in this house, Samira decided to find a way to escape from that hell. After months of physical and mental abuse, she knew she had no one in her husband's family to turn to, not even her mother-in-law. Those around her were silent in the face of Viraj's brutal power, so in desperation, she turned to the only person who could help her, Amir, her ex-boyfriend. Secretly and carefully, Samira writes a letter to Amir telling him everything she has endured and begging him to help her escape this hellish life. She no longer cared about the consequences, only wanting to be freed, no matter what the cost might be. After sending the letter, Samira anxiously waits for Amir's response, hoping that he still cares for her, even though their lives have taken different turns. Amir, after receiving the letter, is heartbroken and decides to help Samira escape. They plan to meet one evening and sneak out of that hellish house. As night falls, Samira quietly leaves home for the second time in her life, as she goes to Amir, hoping this time they can escape all the tragedies. Both run away with dreams of a free future, far away from all the suffering she endured. However, their brief freedom is soon threatened when he discovers that Samira has disappeared. Viraj searches frantically for her, and soon he visits Samira's biological parents, harassing them and demanding the return of the dowry the family received for Samira's marriage. He demanded that Samira's parents return the entire amount, with terrible threats if they did not comply. Samira's family, already poor, could not afford to pay back such a large sum, and they were extremely worried and had no choice but to beg Samira to return to her husband's house. In desperation and helplessness, Samira is forced to return to the hellish house she tried to escape. She knows that this decision means suffering harsher punishments. However, she cannot put her family in danger. Because of her, when she returned to her husband's home, Viraj became even more cruel and tyrannical. He not only physically abused her, but also forced her to serve him like an animal, not treating her as a human being. Every day, Samira was forced to do hard and humiliating work, without any rest or protection for her rights. Viraj no longer saw her as a nominal wife of his son, but as a toy, a tool for satisfying his depraved needs. One fateful night on March 12, 2009, after months of torture and living in despair, Samira decided to meet Amir, her ex-boyfriend, who had tried to help her escape. She couldn't bear it any longer and knew that this time, either she would escape hell forever or everything would end in tragedy. Samira silently planned that night, when the whole family was asleep. Samira and Amir secretly took action. Amir sneaked into the house through the back door and tried to hide in a hidden corner, waiting for the right moment to escape with Samira. Both were tense and worried while Samira was preparing in the kitchen to escape with Amir. Viraj suddenly appeared as he had suspected something when he saw her frequently missing in the evening, and this time his animalistic side emerged again. With his brutal and cruel nature, Viraj did not miss the opportunity to make Samira serve him right there in the kitchen of the house. He did not care about the space or the situation, he only cared about satisfying his tyrannical needs. But this time something Viraj did not expect what happened. With Amir witnessing this horrifying scene, he could not control his anger and indignation, and in a moment of outburst, he grabbed a nearby stick and attacked Viraj. The powerful blow from behind hit Viraj squarely on the head, knocking him down on the spot, as blood was pouring out on the floor, and Viraj died instantly from the fatal blow. Both Samira and Amir, panicked after realizing that Viraj was dead, they knew that the situation was now beyond their control with no way back. They decided to flee immediately, hoping to escape the police and start a new life elsewhere. However, the murder was quickly discovered as family members and servants in the family panicked and informed the police as soon as they found Viraj's body. Police immediately arrived at the scene and began an investigation, and it didn't take long to identify the culprits as Samira and Amir. The two could not escape for long, as the police quickly cordoned off the surrounding area and launched a manhunt for Samira and Amir. Their trail was exposed, and within hours of their escape the two were arrested. The brief escape ends with Samira and Amir being escorted back to the police station. Eyes filled with despair and exhaustion, when arrested both had no choice but to confess to the crime. Amir, out of love and protection for Samira, claimed that he had killed Viraj himself, but he insisted that it was in a fit of rage after witnessing Samira being tortured. Both understood that they had no way out and their fate was now in the hands of the law. After her arrest, Samira, mentally exhausted and so physically tired, decided to tell the police the whole story. She could no longer bear the pain of being abused and assaulted, and in her desire to be free, she confessed everything. During her interrogation, Samira recounted in detail what she had been going through since she entered Viraj's house. She recounted being abused by Viraj, treated like an object, and Viraj's cruelty in publicly abusing her in front of his family and servants. Samira's confession was too much for the police to ignore, as they realized that this was not a simple murder, but the result of a long series of brutal acts of domestic violence. The police decided to investigate further to verify Samira's story, and they immediately summoned Viraj's entire family, including his wife, Reena, and other family members and servants who had witnessed Viraj's atrocities, to clarify the matter during the interrogation. Many family members and servants admitted that they had witnessed Viraj's harassment and abuse of Samira. However, they all remained silent out of fear of his violent nature. The servants even said that they had seen Viraj humiliating Samira many times in the house, sometimes even in front of them, but no one dared to intervene. Viraj's wife, Reena, also confirmed that she was aware of her husband's abuse of Samira. The trial took place on September 25, 2009, and at the trial the entire incident was reenacted before the court. Samira's defense attorneys emphasized the brutal conditions she endured while living under Viraj's abuse. They argued that she was the victim of long-term abuse and that her actions were motivated by desperation. Amir, who directly killed Viraj, admitted to his crime, but he explained that his action was not a pre-planned murder, but a knee-jerk reaction action, as he could not bear to see his loved one being tortured. The court, after hearing the defense, decided to give him a lighter sentence. Amar was sentenced to 8 to 12 years in prison for murder. As for Samira, although the court acknowledged that she was a victim of abuse, because she was complicit in hiding and helping Amir escape, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Samira's sentence was lighter than Amir's because she had suffered more trauma and was forced into harsh circumstances. Samira and Amir's cases were closed, but the tragedy surrounding their lives still left a deep, haunting impression. Samira, an innocent young girl forced to marry into a brutal family, had to go through painful days of abuse and violence. Amir's act of killing Viraj, though a result of anger and despair, cannot erase the trauma both have endured. Although the verdict has been delivered, this story is more than just a legal punishment. It is also a reminder of the tragedies that occur when people are pushed into a corner. If injustice, violence, and despair go unacknowledged and unaddressed, what Samira went through is proof that society needs to pay more attention to protecting victims of domestic violence. Protection is needed for those who have no voice in their own homes. Amira and Amir both pay for their actions, but the real tragedy lies not in the crimes they committed, but in the trauma they endured. The oppression they could not escape, and the case is over, but the pain, loss, and irreversible consequences will remain after. Following this case, do you think there are many women in India who are living in similar circumstances, suffering violence and oppression without a voice? Share your thoughts with everyone in the comments section. Thanks, and until the next story.